Hi, Babushka. She comes down a yellow mountain. On a dark, flat land she rides. On a pony she named Wildfire, with a whirlwind by her side, on a cold Nebraska night. Oh, they say she died one winter, when there came a killing frost, and the pony she named Wildfire busted down his stall. In a blizzard he was lost. That song by Michael Martin Murphey came out when I was a little girl, Babushka. And you know how I was into old school music. I still am. All different kinds. But yeah, I get teased for especially liking music from that time period. And that song in particular, I never played it around you. To me, in my mind, it created a taboo. And kind of like an old country song, you don't like country music, and that's okay. Or you can look at it as just songs that hit your heart, that hit your memories. I know you have those songs. By the way, I did text you about sending you a dress. It'll come in a couple of days. It was one wonderful deal. I couldn't pass it up. And if it doesn't fit you, you know, like I was saying in the text, you can always cut up the fabric or give it away to a friend. Do whatever you like. The color's amazing. It's actually one of your grandmother's, you know, Grandma Esther, you know, your Sarah's mother, one of her favorite shades. Very popular back during the 1940s. But enough of that. Gotta get to this song and talking about your grandfather John. That song has to do with the first argument that him and I had. It had to come out. I loved him. I really did. To me, he was a giant, beautiful man. And despite his canes and braces, and to this day, subconsciously, I see wheelchairs and canes and braces that people use, you know, as aids to help them with their disabilities as an extension of their body. I remember sometimes Dad and I and the other kids, and Mom would tag along at times, we would go swimming at the YMCA as a family. And once, you know, he'd be let into the water, he would be free to move about and swim. He'd take me down into the water with him. It was a wonderful thing to see him be able to move about freely. You know, wonderful thing to see, especially as a child, and especially as the youngest of the children. One of his nicknames for me was Baby. I was the baby. And I saw a lot of things happen around me, and I soaked it in. It can have its repercussions. I grew up respecting horses, but not really interested in the matter. I loved to watch them, you know, at the rodeo. Before they would get ready to let the rodeo begin, they would bring the horses in and put them in the stalls along with the Brahma bulls. Me and my friends, we would observe them and watch them. I would see the markings on them. They would kind of creep me out. Oh, Gus. Gus is tired right now. I just gave him some treats. I hope your kitty cats are doing well too. I still love the photos you sent me. They're adorable. But Gus just knocked down one of the stuffed animals next to the doll I have for you to show my love for you. But the town I grew up in revolved all around horses and showmanship. My cousins and the kids I went to school with, not all of them, but a lot of them, they joined 4-H, and so did all 3 of my older siblings. I was never interested. And, you know, I was interested in other things. I was interested in all animals, all creatures. I would mostly hang around the corral, you know, where they kept the hay and supplies, to observe the feral cats. And there was a little dog, one by the name of Potato, because that was his coloring. He was half fox terrier and half dachshund, half wiener dog. That dog belonged to the wife of your grandfather's old football coach. And he made a promise to take care of that dog. That dog was one of my friends. I had a little puppy that was given to me as a gift when I was 8 years old. Little black mutt. If you look at the old movies of, say, Benji or Boomer, just like it, only she was black. She was dark. Wonderful, wonderful little angel. And that was her name. It was a great thing. But Angel was really hyper. And when we bring her into the house, my dad was afraid of that dog tripping him, you know. And then, even though I had had her all of one summer, one day I came home from playing with my friends. The dog was gone. And there was nothing I could do about it. My mom found another home for that little one. It's okay. But horses. When your grandmother Sarah had her heart attack and went to the hospital, actually before, when she was getting really, really sick. That's right. It was back in the summer when all of that craziness was going on. All the abuse from my oldest brother and all the grooming I was fighting against the other brother. My dad and I would oftentimes go driving. And he would talk on and on and on. Well, all my childhood, he would talk about horses. That horses were something that he loved. And he drove slow. We used to tease him about it. Other cars would honk behind and pass him by. But he would always want to slow down, look at the fields, look at the horses. He had a real, you know, like for him. When he was a little boy, him and his friends, because they were so poor in this small community in the late 1920s, early 30s, they would go to school on horseback. And it was part of their lives. And that's fine. but it was something that never really interested me, okay? When you have a pet like that, and I see them, not just for work for certain farmers, but for kids, they become pets. It takes a lot of work. I wanted to concentrate my interests into other things. And oftentimes, it would be completely ignored or set aside, But we go driving. My dad, I wanted to earn his love. I wanted to please him. But I knew deep down inside something was really wrong with the family. He put it into my head that I needed a horse. I'm like, why? We had 2 other horses. Eventually, they died. And I didn't see why. But in the back of my mind, see, I was only about 11, going on 12. In the back of my mind, I was thinking, well, maybe this will be good between him and I. Maybe this will make him happy. Maybe he'll respect me more. Maybe, the fighting will stop. Maybe I'll get some respect. This respect and attention that would be healthy, that I needed from my brothers. And your aunt, my older sister, she was already out of the house. She grew up around horses. She was involved in the 4-H a lot more than, your uncles were. They did their time in the 4-H too. And our mom helped them all through it. She did whatever she could. And they also had the help and support of our mother's father, Ed. We had an old gray mare. Beautiful horse, but very fat. And I remember one day when I was little, and your Aunt Jewel, she would often tease me about it. Even when you're a little girl and she'd come over to visit, I have an early memory. She has the memory of a teenager because she had me with her in the corral. I was sitting on some hay, and she's taking care of the old gray mare, and I happened to be holding a sucker. I think it was a Tootsie Pop in my hand. And the mare reached over and stole my sucker and ate it. And it made me upset. I remember that. I remember crying. It's like a flash in my mind. So I had a fear there about horses. But it doesn't mean that I wouldn't give her a lump of sugar later on. It doesn't mean that I wouldn't ride her. And I was actually in the rodeo parade one year where your aunt dressed me up. I think I was about 9 years old then, maybe 8. She used a burlap potato sack and cut it up to look like a native costume. And, put feathers in my hair and whatnot. There might be a photo of it somewhere. And I have old corduroy turquoise bell-bottoms on underneath and a pair of, sneakers. Really funny and cute. But she was into that kind of stuff. Like I said, 10-year difference. She saw me as a little kid, and she's a teenager developing and going through her life. But going back to Dad, I would always prefer, if I did ride a horse, to ride him bareback, without a saddle or bridle. That's the native style. I didn't want to get involved in the saddles or the bridles or any of that. And the chores, that's hard work. I wouldn't get involved. I would rather be around other animals or, off in my little corner sewing or crocheting or working on my artwork. That was my thing. But my dad, he wanted me so much to fit in with that community and to please him. And there was a lot of confusion, as I was saying, and a lot of bad things going on where my mom got the brunt of it all and the blame. He convinced me one day while we were driving that he wanted to get me a Shetland pony. I'm like, okay. And then all of a sudden, we're driving out to somebody's farm. It's near Humbleton, kind of on the outskirts, on the south end. And so we approach this farm, and I meet this young girl who's a little bit older than me, and I see the most beautiful, tiny, tiny Shetland pony. A little boy. His name was Giddy, for Giddy Up Go. That's another song you can look up, Giddy Up Go. I know you don't like country music, but it's a great country song if you're ever interested. She played around. That pony got on him in front of me. I didn't have a chance to try him out myself, but her father and my father were negotiating costs. And my dad was so determined. He wanted that horse. And he promised that he would help me and he would get other relatives or friends of the family to help out. I thought, okay, this'll be great. When we brought Giddy home through help of some relatives, it was a great thing. I could ride him however I wanted. But I didn't want to join 4-H. I just wasn't interested, and I really didn't know that much about him. Like I said, I was about 11 years old going on 12. Now, your Uncle Eddie, I think I was around 6th grade, 5th, 6th grade, around this time. Your Uncle Eddie got on that horse many times. He kind of took over as if that horse was his, which is fine. I really didn't want to argue, didn't want to fight it. I was done fighting with him. At this point, it was about avoiding him as much as I could at all costs. And you know why. In the privacy of home, he was trying to groom me. And I was figuring out how to lock the doors using a chair, stuff like that. And very confusing time for me. And especially when Mom went to the hospital. God almighty. Anyways, so one day, your Uncle Eddie is riding Giddy way too hard. And it wasn't the first time. All around that pasture. The pasture was huge. Right on the main street. Across from the rodeo stadium. And the cars, in order to get from point A to point B to the bigger towns, they had to, go down that road so they could see everything. They could see our house, see the pasture, see all the goings on. Eddie rode Giddy one afternoon going into evening way too hard. It was right after dinner, right before Mom had her heart attack, right before she got really, really sick. Last straw with the horse. Horse was sweating. I'm watching. The horse bucked Eddie off, and Eddie had just had one of his final major surgeries and was walking around again without, his crutches as an aid. Animals are smart. Giddy bucked him off and trampled all over his leg. Now I remember my dad, your granddad, took him a while because he always walked slow because of his canes and braces. But oh, the ranting. And I think the whole neighborhood could hear. Was screaming at the back porch. You could hear it echoing everywhere about how he wanted to put Giddy down and how it was the horse's fault. Says a lot. All the promises that my dad gave to me about help and the well-being and getting supplies and fresh hay, it all went down the toilet. I kept asking. I would get stifled. At the same time, we're approaching the time where your grandmother Sarah gets really sick, and all that garbage and abuse accelerated so much in the household. And your grandma, she had to go to the hospital because of the heart attack. My brain was gone. I quit eating. I didn't know what to do. Now looking back, and I've talked to other people, because, I had friends in high school after your grandmother died. You met some of them when you were young. One of them I'm no longer friends with. One I haven't talked to in years, but I'm sure if I would contact her someday, we would get along just great. She was wonderful. She was the one who helped me. You'd go over to her farm sometimes, over in the new town that I had lived at after my mom died, the town of Houston, south of Salem, the new town. Her and her family had a small farm, and when you were little, I wanted to make sure, come hell, death, or damnation, that you would have the opportunity to know what it was like to be on a horse. And I was really thankful for that friend Rose. Wonderful, wonderful woman. She had a different upbringing than me. And when I told her the story of Giddy while we were in high school, she was like, wow. And we came to the conclusion, too, that that horse was a lot older than what the original owner, the owner wasn't being honest with Dad. So, Grandma's in the hospital. I'm not eating. I let the horse go out of my mind. A part of me didn't want to live. It's common with kids. It's common with adults. But I felt like everything around me was out of control. I had no control over any of the elements, any of my family members. I didn't know what to do. I left the horse alone. Even if I would ask people, they wouldn't help out. Even if I would ask my dad, he wouldn't help out. It was nothing but ranting and screaming, and everything blamed on my mom. Remember, house is on the main road. Mom's in the hospital. The hay wasn't fresh anymore. And I couldn't think straight. You know, there was nobody there. Even the priest, he would visit once a week. It's weird how things get ignored or let go. I come home from school one day. It's snowing. Pouring snow like a blizzard, very thick and heavy that year. The horse was dead in the middle of the pasture. Cars are driving by. Everybody could see. Looking back on it now, and then talking to that old high school friend of mine years ago, and talking to another youth pastor I became close to, him and his wife, in the town of Houston. Could have been symbolic. You know, you cry out and something is dying inside of you. Those things happen, you know. Animals, they do die, just like people. But everybody ignored it. Eventually, they had to hire somebody to dig a hole, you know, with a little device, kind of like a crane, to lift the horse up and bury him, right in the middle of the pasture. I didn't care. I cared about other things, but that was the last straw. So when I started visiting my father after Mom died, I brought up the subject of that horse. He didn't want to listen to me. And it creeped him out too, because I had dyed my hair dark. In fact, it was a rebellion against my mom because she never wanted me to dye my hair black. Because she said, with olive in my skin, it wouldn't be right. And it was just too radical for her taste. She wanted it to be natural. But I wanted to experiment, you know. But when I dyed my hair darker, it made me look a lot more like her. So there were times when I visited Dad in that beginning, and I did not tell my guardians about what we talked about at all. I felt like it was none of their business, and I'll tell you why later on. But it was bringing up the subject about Giddy Up Go that really hit it to heart with your grandfather. He wanted to avoid me. He would look at me, and his eyes would get big. His blue eyes would get really big. And it was almost like he was seeing a ghost. I loved him. But I wanted answers. There was a time, one day, when I'm at the house, your Uncle Eddie's not there, and then Uncle Jack, he's off in military school. Or at least he was getting ready to go off there. Yeah. He was actually finishing military school. But your grandfather, he couldn't go very fast to avoid me, to save his life. But I confronted him in the kitchen about why he bought that horse for me, what was behind it all, and how that affected me psychologically. I wasn't using terms like that back then, But, how it hurt my heart, and how he didn't know me, but I knew things about him, and I would question him. Times when he would get really, really angry or really, really cocky about stuff. He would act a lot like the character from All in the Family, Archie Bunker. And I would mock him back at times, just like the wife Edith. That's okay, Archie. You just keep talking. Yeah. And it would piss him off, okay? And then we'd calm down a little bit. On his good days, he was a lot like Jack Benny. He's one of my favorite comedians. The character was similar. And, believe it or not, around his friends and people who loved his stories, he was a lot like William Shatner, if you can believe that, in his mannerisms and character. Kind of like Captain Kirk, sure. Why not? When I was little, I saw him as a form of a Superman. And I still wanted to. But he avoided me during that time. We were having an argument. He made it down the old hallway past the bathroom into his bedroom. And he wasn't able to lock the door. At that house, we had the old doorknobs where you used a skeleton key. That house was built in 1900, and there weren't a lot of revisions with it. The electricity was so old school. I think the switches, most of the main switches, were something out of the 1930s, believe it or not. But there was no way of him really locking the door in time. And I chased him into the bedroom. I made him sit on the bed. And I did one of the most powerful things. This is powerful magic. I hugged him. And I would not let go. Powerful juju. That was the beginning of us communicating. They talk about CPTSD, all of that. Well, okay. I had to get answers. I wanted to know what happened to him in his past, because things can happen in a family that can go down and down and down generations that affect the present generations, okay? It is a social issue, not just an individual issue. When they talk about narcissism, bipolar disorder, all those things, okay? And they change with their research and this and that, but not all of that has been perfect. You have to conclude and have what's going on around as a whole. Not just the family, but in society. You have to look at things from every perspective. That's important. If you don't do that, you come up against a wall, and things won't really have a healing or a healthy conclusion where you can move on. I challenged him. And I loved him, and I hugged him. It's kind of the same way I was in that terrible relationship. And, I was hoping to change somebody. You know exactly who I'm talking about. It's funny, talking about that thing. You challenged me, and you missed your real father. And before that horrible relationship, I was in that horrible marriage to your stepfather. You didn't see the horribleness. Not all of it. But you saw me upset and angry. It wasn't just the anger I was dealing with knowing and realizing I made a mistake with this person. It was also all the horribleness and how I was dealing with my family and the people around me. You had a right to challenge me, and it was a good thing that I sent you away from danger, because then we could both step back. Anyways, that's in the past. And I love you so much. And you told me one day, not too long ago, you can kind of understand now why I was the way I was. Just when you hold on to things inside you where you're not allowed, or it might ruffle feathers if you talk about stuff, that's not healthy at all. But that's what I had to do. Your grandfather started to open up about stuff. And then at the same time, and I'll get into my guardians later on. Well, my guardian and her husband, he was never my guardian at all. But she was. She was all about money. And I had to pay rent to her at the age of 15 in order to live there. That was her rule. She wanted me to do certain things I didn't want to do, that I refused to do, like go to the Catholic Church again. I tried in the beginning, but I just couldn't do it. But more than anything, she showed me in those 2 years that I lived there in Houston, in a beautiful, nice house, you know. She showed me that it was all about money with her. She hated my dad. And the rest of her family, we were all family friends. And her father was one of the best friends of my dad. They were friends since they were 4 years old. But she knew that he owed child support. She wanted it all. And it made no sense. I was getting a stipend, a small stipend of Social Security, and I was on my way of getting a job as a waitress, you know. That way I could stand on my own 2 feet and learn. I wanted to do it so bad. But I made a decision that getting back child support wasn't as important as getting an understanding through my father and trying to rekindle just a morsel, a speck of our love for each other, and to get some answers about Mom. You know, when it came to issues about the boys, about my brothers, that had to be set aside, and that was okay at that time. But I decided, after having that one wonderful moment of bonding with my dad, that bond and getting those answers was more important than any money in the world. And I wanted to visit him, and I wanted us to go on drives together again. I wanted to see him. It's funny, after all those tears and all that hugging and everything else, I end up going into the kitchen. And I know you don't like me smoking. It was my only real rebellion when it came to drugs. But I lit up a cigarette. I sat at the kitchen table, kind of stared out the window overlooking the backyard into the pasture, the back part of that big pasture where Giddy died. No more horses. Everything kind of overgrown with weeds, blackberry bushes, morning glory, and those stinky, smelly, ugly belladonna weeds. My dad, soon after, came trotting along slowly into the kitchen. He asked me for a cigarette. I said, sure. Like, are you mad at me for smoking? He said no. And then he started telling me a story. He's told it many, 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 many times about how he started smoking at the age of 10 years old. He would steal cigarettes, packs, out of his mom's carton. And then she caught him and some of his friends smoking in the horse corral, you know, around the hay. And one of the only times she got mad at him and punished him with spankings was during that time, because she didn't want them to set, you know, the corral or the barn on fire. 10 years old, you know. I listened, you know, he had amazing tales, just incredible. Later on, in the clip arts and graphics, I'll tell you about a guy, a cousin of his with a last name Blessed, Brian Blessed. Oh my goodness. Because as a child, you know, the stories of my dad's childhood, he would tell me that this older cousin of his had a lot of my traits, a lot of the running fast and running on the toes and doing weird, bizarre things and having weird, bizarre dreams. He was an oddity. And my dad and his friends would like to pick on this guy, who was actually a teenager when they were little. Maybe that's where the Rh negative trait comes from. I don't know. But I loved hearing those tales because they were funny as hell. But yeah, I made that decision. And that'll open up to more stuff. I better wrap up this video. But contact me anytime. And I love you. I think about the horses down in Oregon right now and parts of Washington and California with those horrible fires. I'll put out another video here in a few minutes about how I feel about that. I don't think it has all to do with just climate change. I think a lot of it has to do with, you know, decisions that society and the government made, you know, and how it affects the working class and the farmers. Anyway, sweetheart, I'll put out another video about it for you. I love you. And tell your husband I send my love too. Take care. And oh yeah, don't forget to ring the bell. Goodbye.